Subtleties targeted the new kid. They had no idea. He was an underground champion. Elijah Morgan kept his head down as he navigated the crowded hallways of Westbrook High School. At 15, he was small for his age, 5'6" and skinny, with narrow shoulders and wiry arms that looked like they'd snap under any significant weight. His light brown skin was clear, but his face was angular, with prominent cheekbones and a slightly crooked nose from an old injury. Unruly black curls spilled over his forehead, partially hiding deep-set hazel eyes that darted nervously from side to side. It was his third week at Westbrook, and so far, he'd managed to remain mostly invisible. That suited him fine. Invisibility meant safety. In his experience, being noticed only led to trouble. Unfortunately, invisibility was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. What no one at Westbrook knew, what Elijah had worked diligently to conceal, was that beneath his baggy clothes and hesitant demeanor lay the body and mind of a fighter. For the past 5 years, Elijah had trained in underground fighting rings under his uncle's guidance, mastering a blend of Muay Thai, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and street fighting techniques that made him lethal in combat. By 14, he'd become something of a legend in certain circles, known as the Ghost, for his ability to appear unthreatening until the moment he struck. His family had moved to this affluent suburb after his uncle's arrest, hoping for a fresh start away from the violence that had defined their previous life. His mother's only request had been simple: "No fighting, Elijah. Promise me." And he had promised, determined to be just a normal kid for once, but normality was proving elusive at Westbrook High. "Hey, new kid," the voice echoed down the hallway, sending a familiar chill down Elijah's spine. He recognized the voice without turning. Derek Holloway, the self-appointed king of Westbrook's senior class. Derek stood 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and muscled arms covered in amateur tattoos, most noticeably a poorly executed skull on his right forearm and barbed wire circling his left bicep. At 18, he already had the intimidating presence of someone much older, enhanced by his tendency to wear leather despite the season and the permanent sneer etched on his face. The small scar running through his right eyebrow gave him a perpetually angry expression, though Elijah suspected he'd be angry regardless. Flanking Derek were his two constant companions, Tyler Quinn, a heavy-set boy with a shaved head and knuckle tattoos spelling hurt and pain, which Elijah found laughably unoriginal, and Marcus Reed, tall and lanky with a snake tattoo winding up his neck and a collection of facial piercings that made him look like he'd fallen face first into a tackle box. Elijah kept walking, quickening his pace slightly. "Just keep moving, don't engage." "I said, hey, new kid, you deaf or something?" Derek's hand landed heavily on Elijah's shoulder, spinning him around. The hallway quieted as other students sensed potential entertainment. From the corner of his eye, Elijah noticed a teacher glance their way before hurriedly continuing toward the faculty lounge. Typical. Elijah felt his body automatically shift into a defensive stance. He forced himself to slump to look afraid. It wasn't entirely an act. He was afraid, just not of these boys. He was afraid of what he might do to them. "What do you want?" Elijah asked quietly, eyes downcast. Derek laughed, looking at his friends. "What do I want? I want to know why there's a twig like you in my hallway. This is senior territory. You lost, freshman?" "I'm a sophomore," Elijah corrected reflexively, immediately regretting it. Derek's eyes narrowed. "Oh, a sophomore with a mouth on him. You know, I don't think we've properly welcomed you to Westbrook yet, have we, boys?" Tyler cracked his knuckles theatrically, while Marcus chuckled, the sound reminiscent of a smoker's cough. "Definitely haven't," Marcus agreed. "I don't want trouble," Elijah said, the phrase so familiar it felt scripted. "How many times have I said those exact words before demolishing someone?" "Trouble found you anyway," Derek said, shoving Elijah hard against the lockers. The metal clattered loudly as Elijah's back connected with it. He absorbed the impact easily, but allowed his body to sag as if hurt. "After school behind the gym, don't make us come find you." With that, the three walked away, Tyler deliberately bumping Elijah's shoulder as he passed. Around him, students began to whisper, some looking at him with pity, others with the hungry anticipation of spectators at a gladiatorial match. Elijah collected himself and continued to his class, the familiar buzz of adrenaline coursing through his veins. He didn't show up behind the gym that afternoon. Instead, he went straight home, knowing it would only make things worse tomorrow, but unwilling to break his promise to his mother just yet. The following day, as expected, they were waiting for him. "Thought you could hide, new boy?" Derek growled, catching Elijah as he tried to enter the cafeteria. "Nobody stands us up. Nobody." This time, they didn't just issue threats. Tyler grabbed Elijah's backpack, upending it in the middle of the busy cafeteria. Books, papers, and pens scattered across the floor as students looked on. Marcus kicked Elijah's math textbook across the room, while Derek held him by the collar of his shirt. "Tomorrow, behind the gym, or we find you at home," Derek hissed, his breath hot against Elijah's face. "And trust me, you don't want that." Elijah said nothing, his face a mask of practiced submission. Inside, however, old instincts were awakening. Target points identified automatically, weaknesses assessed, potential weapons in the environment noted. He pushed these thoughts away firmly. "Not here, not now, I promised." For the next week, Elijah managed a delicate balancing act. Present enough at school to avoid truancy calls, but skilled at disappearing whenever Derek and his crew appeared. He ate lunch in the library, changed his routes between classes, and left school grounds the moment the final bell rang. It was exhausting, but effective, until it wasn't. It was Marcus who caught him first, spotting Elijah as he slipped out a side door near the science labs. "Got him!" Marcus shouted, and moments later Tyler appeared from around the corner, effectively blocking Elijah's escape route. "Been playing hard to get, freshman," Tyler said, advancing slowly. "Boss isn't happy about that." "Sophomore," Elijah corrected again, immediately regretting falling into the same trap. "Whatever," Tyler scoffed. "You're coming with us now." What followed was a forced march across school grounds to the student parking lot, where Derek was leaning against a beat-up black Camaro, smoking a cigarette despite the school's strict no-smoking policy. Several other seniors loitered nearby, clearly anticipating entertainment. "Finally," Derek said, flicking his cigarette away as they approached, "our guest of honor arrives." Elijah remained silent, scanning the area. Approximately 15 students had gathered, forming a loose circle. No teachers in sight. The parking lot cameras were positioned to watch the cars, not this particular corner. He was on his own. "Cat got your tongue?" Derek taunted, stepping closer. "That's okay. You won't need to talk for what we've got planned." The first punch came from Marcus, a sloppy right hook that Elijah could have countered in his sleep. Instead, he moved just enough to take it on the shoulder rather than the jaw, wincing appropriately. "That's just a taste," Derek said, grinning. "You've been disrespectful, avoiding us like that. Disrespect costs extra." What followed was a calculated display of intimidation, not intended to cause serious injury but designed to humiliate. They shoved him around their circle, tripping him, landing carefully placed strikes that hurt without leaving visible marks. Elijah played his part, stumbling and falling, allowing himself to appear utterly helpless. "Not so tough now, are you?" Derek laughed, holding Elijah up by his collar. "Tomorrow you start paying protection money. $20 a day keeps us away, got it?" Elijah nodded weakly, his mind racing. "This is extortion. This is why they pick on the vulnerable ones. It's a business for them." "Good boy," Derek said, patting Elijah's cheek condescendingly. "And if you even think about telling anyone, remember, we know where you live now." He gestured to Tyler, who produced Elijah's school ID with his address clearly visible. They left him there in the parking lot, surrounded by scattered papers and dirt. As the crowd dispersed, a girl he vaguely recognized from his English class approached cautiously. "Are you okay?" she asked, helping him gather his things. "Fine," Elijah muttered, not making eye contact. "I'm Zoe," she said. "Those guys are the worst. They do this to someone new every year. Last year it was my brother." Elijah looked up then, studying her face. She had kind eyes and a determined set to her jaw. "What happened to your brother?" "He transferred schools," she said simply. "Most people do eventually, or they pay up, or—" She trailed off. "Or what? Or they become part of Derek's crew. Either way, nobody stands up to them. Not since they put Jamie Lewis in the hospital last year." Elijah absorbed this information silently. So this wasn't just bullying, it was systematic intimidation, a small-scale protection racket run by teenagers with too much power and too little supervision. "Thanks for the help," he said finally, taking his papers from her hands. "Be careful," she warned as he walked away. "They always come back worse the second time." She wasn't wrong. The next day, Elijah came prepared with $20, money he'd been saving for new training gloves. He'd decided that paying them off temporarily was smarter than fighting back. Not because he couldn't win, but because winning would mean breaking his promise, revealing his past, potentially having to move schools again. His mother was happier here than she'd been in years. He wouldn't ruin that. But when Derek and his crew cornered him in the boys' locker room after gym class, they weren't interested in just $20 anymore. "See, we've been talking," Derek said, sitting on a bench and watching as Tyler and Marcus blocked the exits. And 20 a day seems low for someone like you. Someone like me? Elijah asked, confused. Yeah, a little rich boy playing poor. Marcus sneered. We saw where you live, that new development on Oak Ridge. Those houses go for what, $500,000 minimum? Elijah bit back a laugh. The house was his aunt's, and they were staying in her basement apartment while his mum saved for a security deposit on their own place. But explaining socioeconomic nuance to these three seemed pointless. I don't have more than 20, he said instead. Derek stood, his face darkening. Well, that's a problem, because today's rate just went up to 50. I don't have it, Elijah repeated. That's too bad, Derek said, nodding to the others. Guess we'll have to take payment another way. What happened next was different from the parking lot. This wasn't for show. There was no audience to impress, no need to hold back. Tyler locked the door while Marcus grabbed Elijah from behind, pinning his arms. Derek took his time, methodically landing punches to Elijah's stomach and ribs, places where bruises wouldn't show in school. This is what happens to people who don't pay their debts, he explained calmly as if teaching a lesson. Nothing personal, just business. Every instinct in Elijah's body screamed for him to fight back. His muscles twitched with the need to break Marcus's hold, to counter Derek's predictable attack pattern, to show these amateurs what real fighting looked like. It would be so easy. Instead, he went limp in Marcus's grip, allowing the blows to land. He'd endured worse in training, much worse. When they finally released him, he crumpled to the floor, curling protectively around his midsection. It wasn't entirely an act. Derek had managed to land a few solid hits. Tomorrow, $50. Or this gets worse, Derek promised, adjusting his leather jacket as if he'd just completed a normal business transaction. And Elijah? Don't be late. After they left, Elijah remained on the floor for several minutes, focusing on his breathing, taking inventory of his injuries. Nothing serious, some bruising, maybe a bruised rib, nothing broken, nothing that would prevent him from fighting, if he chose to. But I promised. No fighting. He made it through the rest of the day in a haze of pain and growing anger. At home, he carefully concealed his injuries from his mother, who was preoccupied with her new job anyway. In his small bedroom, he wrapped his ribs with athletic tape and applied arnica gel to the worst bruises, tricks he'd learned years ago. That night, he couldn't sleep. His mind kept replaying the day's events, but with different endings. Endings where he didn't hold back, where Derek learned exactly who he was dealing with. Endings that violated his promise. The next morning brought a decision. He would avoid school while he figured out a more permanent solution, one that didn't involve fighting or paying extortion money he didn't have. This plan lasted exactly 3 days. On the 4th day, as he was leaving the corner store where he'd been hiding out during school hours, a familiar black Camaro pulled up beside him. Playing hooky? Derek called from the driver's seat, Tyler and Marcus grinning from beside him. That's another rule broken. Get in. No, Elijah said simply, continuing to walk. The car door opened and Tyler emerged, moving with surprising speed, for someone his size. Before Elijah could react, or rather before he allowed himself to react, Tyler had grabbed him by the arm and was forcibly guiding him toward the car. Not a request, Tyler growled. What choice did he have? Fighting here, on a public street, would create exactly the kind of scene he'd been trying to avoid. With reluctance, he got into the back seat, sandwiched between Tyler and Marcus. Derek drove them to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, the kind of location that screamed bad decisions in every horror movie ever made. The irony wasn't lost on Elijah. How many times had he fought in places just like this in his old life? Inside, the warehouse was mostly empty, except for some broken furniture, graffiti-covered walls, and a disturbing amount of empty beer bottles and cigarette butts. This was clearly a regular hangout spot. Here's the thing, Derek said, pacing in front of Elijah while his friends stood guard. You've been disrespectful. First, you avoid us. Then, you claim you can't pay. Now, you're skipping school to avoid. Your obligations, that's 3 strikes. I don't have the money, Elijah repeated. Beating me up won't change that. No, Derek agreed, but it'll make me feel better, and it'll send a message to the next kid who thinks they can get away with disrespecting us. This time, they didn't hold back at all. Working together with the confidence of long practice, the 3 older boys surrounded Elijah, taking turns landing blows while the others held him in place. It was calculated, brutal, and efficient. Not the chaotic fighting of amateurs, but the methodical violence of experienced bullies who had done this many times before. Through it all, Elijah remained passive, absorbing the punches, kicks, and verbal abuse without resistance. But inside something was shifting. Each blow seemed to chip away at the promise he'd made, revealing the fighter beneath. His hands curled into fists and uncurled. His eyes tracked movement patterns. His body instinctively tensed to counter. Blows he deliberately allowed to land. Finally, when Elijah was on his knees, breathing heavily and tasting blood, Derek crouched in front of him. "Here's the new deal," he said quietly. "You come back to school tomorrow. You bring $100. Consider it interest for making us track you down, then 50 every day after that. If you don't, we'll visit that nice little basement apartment where you and your mom live. Got it?" The threat to his mother cleared Elijah's mind instantly. All the careful compartmentalization, all the promises, all the attempts at normalcy, none of it mattered if his mother wasn't safe. "I understand," he said, his voice surprisingly steady despite the blood dripping from his split lip. "Good," Derek nodded, standing. "Tyler will drive you back. Wouldn't want you getting lost." The ride back was silent, Elijah staring out the window, as Tyler drummed his fingers on the steering wheel. When they reached the corner store, Tyler turned to him with a smirk. "See you tomorrow, rich boy. Don't forget our money." Elijah said nothing as he exited the car, waiting until the Camaro disappeared around the corner before allowing himself to really feel his injuries. His ribs screamed in protest as he straightened. His left eye was swelling shut. His lip was definitely split. Explaining this to his mother would be impossible. Instead of going home, he walked to a nearby park, found a secluded bench, and finally let himself think clearly about his situation. The solution was obvious, had been from the start. He needed to fight back, not just defend himself, but send a message so clear that they would never bother him or anyone else again. But he'd promised his mother. No fighting, no returning to that life. As the sun began to set, Elijah made his decision. Some promises had to be broken to keep others. He would protect his mother. He would end this, but he would do it right. That night, he told his mother he was studying at a friend's house, their first real lie since moving here. Instead, he returned to his old routines. In the basement of their apartment, he wrapped his hands properly for the first time in months. He shadowboxed, ignoring the pain in his ribs, reawakening muscle memories that had never really faded. He reviewed everything he knew about his opponents, their patterns, their weaknesses, their habits. Tomorrow would be different. Elijah arrived at school early the next day, his face still showing evidence of yesterday's beating despite his best efforts with cold compresses and his mother's concealer. He dressed differently, fitted clothes rather than his usual baggy attire, good training shoes instead of worn sneakers. His hair was pulled back, revealing his full face. He looked like himself for the first time since moving to Westbrook. Throughout the morning, he caught people staring, some with pity, others with shock, most with the uncomfortable recognition of complicity through inaction. Zoe approached him between classes, her eyes widening at the sight of his face. "Oh my God, what did they do to you?" she gasped. "What they always do," Elijah replied calmly. "But it's the last time." Her eyes narrowed. "What does that mean? You're not going to do something stupid, are you?" "Define stupid," he said with a slight smile that pulled at his split lip. "Elijah, they put a kid in the hospital last year. 3 against 1 aren't good odds." "They aren't," he agreed, "for them." Before she could respond, the bell rang, and Elijah disappeared into his next class, leaving Zoe staring after him with a mixture of concern and curiosity. Lunch period came. Too quickly and not quickly enough. As expected, Derek and his crew were waiting at their usual table in the far corner of the cafeteria, watching the entrance. When Elijah walked in, straight-backed and purposeful rather than hunched and evasive, their faces registered momentary surprise before settling back into smug certainty. Elijah didn't wait for them to approach him. Instead, he walked directly to their table, aware of the gradual hush falling over the cafeteria, as students noticed something unusual happening. By the time he reached Derek, the room was nearly silent, all eyes on the unfolding scene. "You're looking brave today," Derek commented, leaning back in his chair. "Did you bring our money?" "No," Elijah said simply. Derek's eyebrows rose. "No? After our conversation yesterday? That's a bold choice." "I'm making a lot of those today," Elijah replied. "Here's a new deal. You and your friends leave me alone. You leave everyone alone. No more extortion, no more beatings. It ends now." The cafeteria erupted in whispers as Derek and his friends exchanged incredulous looks before bursting into laughter. "Or what?" Derek asked when he'd recovered. "You'll bleed on us again?" "Something like that," Elijah said with a calmness that finally seemed to register with Derek as unusual. Derek stood slowly, towering over Elijah. Around them, Tyler and Marcus rose as well, forming their usual intimidating triangle. "Behind the gym now, we'll finish this privately." "No," Elijah said, not moving. "Right here, right now, in front of everyone." Derek's face darkened. "You want an audience for your beatdown? Fine by me." The first punch was predictable, a big, telegraphed right hook aimed at Elijah's already bruised face. In his past fights, Elijah would have slipped inside the punch and countered with devastating efficiency. Today he simply leaned back slightly, allowing the fist to whoosh past harmlessly. The second punch met a similar fate, as did the third. By the fourth failed attempt, Derek's face had reddened with exertion and embarrassment. Around them, the stunned silence had given way to scattered whispers and the occasional nervous laugh. "Stop dancing and fight," Derek growled, lunging forward in frustration. "If you insist," Elijah replied quietly. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion for the cafeteria audience, but was over in seconds. Elijah stepped into Derek's charge, redirecting the larger boy's momentum while simultaneously striking 3 pressure points in rapid succession. Derek stumbled, suddenly unable to feel his right arm properly. Before he could recover, Elijah had swept his legs out from under him, sending him crashing to the floor. Tyler and Marcus didn't wait for instructions. They attacked simultaneously, exactly as Elijah had anticipated. He ducked under Tyler's wild swing, using the bigger boy's momentum to direct him straight into Marcus. As they collided awkwardly, Elijah delivered a precise strike to Tyler's solar plexus, driving the air from his lungs. Marcus recovered quickly, pulling a small knife from his pocket, an escalation Elijah had considered likely given their desperation. To maintain status, the appearance of the weapon caused gasps and screams from the watching students, some backing away while others pressed closer, phones recording. "That's a mistake," Elijah warned, his stance shifting subtly. Marcus lunged with the knife. Elijah sidestepped, caught the outstretched arm, and applied pressure to exactly the right nerve cluster. The knife clattered to the floor as Marcus howled in sudden pain, his fingers refusing to respond to his commands. A quick twist of the captured arm, and Marcus joined his friends on the ground. Derek was struggling to his feet, his right arm hanging uselessly at his side. "What the fuck are you?" he demanded, his voice somewhere between anger and fear. Elijah didn't answer immediately. Instead, he surveyed the scene. 3 larger opponents neutralized in less than 30 seconds without causing any permanent damage, just as he'd been trained. "I'm the wrong person to bully," he said finally, loud enough for everyone to hear. "And so is everyone else at this school." He turned to address the stunned cafeteria at large. "They've been running a protection racket, targeting new kids, vulnerable kids, extorting money, beating people who can't or won't pay. It ends today." Tyler had managed to get to his knees, still struggling for breath. "You're dead," he wheezed. "You have no idea who you're messing with." Elijah smiled then, a cold expression that transformed his face into something older and more dangerous. "Actually, I do, but you had no idea who you were messing with." He crouched beside the fallen boys, speaking quietly so only they could hear. "I've been fighting in underground matches since I was 10. Men twice your size with actual fighting skills. You're nothing but playground bullies with delusions of adequacy." Standing again, he addressed the crowd once more. "Anyone else who's been paying them, you don't have to anymore. Anyone they've threatened, you're safe now." As if on cue, the cafeteria doors burst open and 2 security guards rushed in, followed closely by the principal and several teachers. Elijah didn't resist as they escorted him to the office, aware of the hundreds of eyes following his exit, aware too of the phones that had recorded everything, the story already spreading beyond the walls of the cafeteria. In the principal's office, consequences unfolded predictably. Elijah faced suspension for fighting, despite multiple students coming forward with stories of Derek's extortion ring and dozens of video recordings showing Elijah had acted in self-defense. Marcus faced more serious consequences for bringing a weapon to school. All 3 bullies were suspended pending further investigation into the extortion allegations. Explaining everything to his mother was the hardest part. She listened silently as Elijah recounted the whole story, her face growing increasingly troubled. "You promised," she said finally, her voice tight with disappointment. "I promised not to fight," Elijah acknowledged, "but I also promised to protect. You always. When they threatened to come here to our home..." He shook his head. "Some promises outweigh others." She was quiet for a long moment, before reaching out to touch his bruised face gently. "I just wanted you to have a normal life. Maybe normal isn't in the cards for me, he suggested, but I used what I know to protect others, not just myself. Isn't that what really matters? The days of suspension passed quickly. When Elijah returned to school, everything had changed. The story had grown with each retelling, his actions portrayed with increasing embellishment. In the hallways, students who had previously ignored him now nodded in recognition or offered hesitant smiles. Several came forward with their own stories about Derek and his crew, expressing gratitude for his intervention. Zoe caught up with him at his locker on his first day back. "So," she said without preamble, "underground fighting, huh? That's not what I was expecting." Elijah shrugged. "It wasn't something I was advertising. My brother would have liked to see what you did," she said. "He still has nightmares about those guys. They won't be bothering anyone anymore," Elijah assured her. Derek and his friends had returned to school with subdued demeanors and visible bruises to their egos. They gave Elijah a wide berth, flinching whenever he came near. More importantly, their protection racket had been exposed, and they were under scrutiny from both school authorities and local police. "Lunch?" Zoe offered, gesturing toward the cafeteria. For the first time since arriving at Westbrook, Elijah didn't feel the need to find a hidden corner or eat alone in the library. "Sure," he agreed. As they walked together, he felt a weight lifting. The constant vigilance, the careful concealment of his abilities, the isolation, all of it had taken a toll he hadn't fully recognized until now. Fighting hadn't brought back his old life. It had freed him to create a new one. In the cafeteria, they joined a table where several other students greeted them warmly. The conversation flowed naturally, touching on classes and weekend plans rather than underground fighting or school bullies. Elijah participated cautiously at first, then with increasing confidence. During a lull in the conversation, he glanced across the room to where Derek sat alone, his usual entourage dispersed. Their eyes met briefly, and Elijah was surprised to see not hatred but a strange kind of respect in the other boy's gaze. Derek nodded once, a small acknowledgement before turning away. "You okay?" Zoe asked, noticing his momentary distraction. Elijah smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. "Yeah," he said, realizing it was true. "I think I finally am." Later that afternoon, as he walked home alone, Elijah reflected on everything that had happened. He had broken one promise to keep another, had revealed a part of himself he'd intended to leave behind, had disrupted the careful normalcy his mother had sought for them. And yet, the outcome felt right. Justice served without excessive force, bullies stopped without becoming one himself, respect earned rather than fear instilled. Perhaps there was a middle path between his old life and the complete denial of his abilities, a way to be both the fighter he had been trained to be and the normal teenager his mother wanted him to become. The confrontation in the cafeteria hadn't pulled him back into underground fighting. It had shown him how to use those skills for something better. As he reached the apartment, he made a new promise to himself, to find that balance, to use his strength to protect rather than dominate, to be seen for who he truly was, rather than hiding behind a careful facade. It wouldn't be easy, but few worthwhile things ever were. Inside, he found his mother waiting, her expression uncertain but hopeful. "How was school?" she asked, the simple question carrying the weight of everything that had happened. "Different," Elijah replied honestly, "but better." She nodded, accepting his answer and everything it implied about their new reality. "Dinner's almost ready," she said, returning to the kitchen. Elijah smiled as he followed her. Different, but better. It was a start.